Hey guys, happy Sunday. I hope you guys are doing well. Okay, so we're just gonna jump right into our lesson today because we got quite a bit to cover today. Let's do our prayer. Hopefully you guys have already learned it. So let's bow our heads. God in heaven, hear my prayer. Keep me in thy loving care. Be my guide in all I do. Bless all those who love me too. Amen. So today we're gonna learn about Deborah. Deborah was a judge over the people of Israel, the town of Israel, the nation of Israel, right? But before we learn about Deborah, we're just going to do a quick recap on Daniel's lesson last Sunday, which was about Gideon, right? So Gideon was also a judge of the nation of Israel, over Israel. He was a judge after Deborah, actually. So real quick, just to recap with Gideon, he was one of the 5 major judges of Israel, right? He destroyed the altar for the pagan god Baal. He destroyed that altar. He united the people of Israel, and together with God's power, through God's power, they defeated their enemies, right? And Gideon is also in the Faith Hall of Fame in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. So, so Gideon made it onto the Faith Hall of Fame. Yes, there is a Hall of Fame for faith, just like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the NBA Hall of Fame, all those halls of fames, but, the Faith Hall of Fame, right? So, Deborah, we're going to learn about Deborah. Deborah was a judge before Gideon. She was one of the 5 major judges also, right? Deborah used to wear a lot of different hats, and I don't mean that literally, I mean that metaphorically, as in she had a lot of roles, different roles that she played in her life, right, throughout her life. So Deborah, not only was she a judge, she was also a priestess and prophetess, she was a wife, and she was also a warrior. So let's get into it, right? So Deborah, being a judge, she used to sit under this tree, which they called the tree of Deborah, because that's where she used to sit, and people used to come and seek counsel from her, right, or judgment from her. She was said to be a very, very wise judge, just as wise as Solomon. Hopefully you guys know who Solomon is. Solomon is in the Bible too. So okay. So people used to come and seek counsel from her. An example would be like, oh man, Deborah, I have this really, really loud and noisy neighbor. I don't know what to do, about it. So Deborah would probably give something like an advice, something like, well, go and talk to your neighbor, and try to work it out, try to find a middle ground, right? So she was said to be very wise. So anyway, being a priestess and a prophetess for God as well, God often spoke to her. So the people of Israel prayed to God because they were being oppressed by their enemy at the time, which was the nation of Canaan, right? So they prayed to God to deliver them from their enemy. So God spoke to Deborah and told her to speak to Barak, to seek out Barak, right? B-A-R-A-K. Not to be confused with former President Barack Obama, not the same spelling. I looked it up, okay? So she seeks out Barak and tells him, God has spoken to me and has said that you must gather 10,000 soldiers and go and fight against the nation of Canaan, because you will be victorious over that nation. So we will defeat our enemies. So Barak talks to Deborah basically and tells her like, okay, all right, I'll go if you go with me, or otherwise if you don't go, I won't go. So we're going to read a few verses from the Bible real quick. My favorite, very light, very small Bible. You guys may have seen it before. Okay, so Deborah's story can be found in the book of Judges. The interesting thing about Deborah's story is that it's told both in prose and poetry. So Prose is just it's a fancy name for a story. So her story is actually told in the first, not the first chapter, but the first part of her story, I guess, which is Judges chapter 4. So we're going to read Judges chapter 4, verse 4. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. So, she was a judge of Israel. We're going to skip a few verses, and we're going to go down to verses 8 and 9, still of chapter 4 from Judges. And it reads, And Barak said unto her, If thou wilt go with me, then I will go. But if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with thee, notwithstanding the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor. For the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Okay, so basically, that's when Deborah talked to Barak, and Barak was like, hey, I'll go into battle if you go with me. Otherwise, I will not go. So Deborah was like, all right, let's go. Vamonos, let's do this. So getting back into the story of Deborah in the book of Judges. So chapter 4 tells her story in prose form, right? Just a story. Tells the happenings, the events, just like that. Chapter 5 of Judges actually it's called the Song of Deborah, because it's the story of Deborah, but it's told in poetic form, right? As a poem, versus just a story. So anyway, so Deborah says, yes, I'll go into battle with you, Barak. Let's gather 10,000 soldiers and let's go, right? So they go into battle. So 10,000 soldiers versus the captain of the Canaanites, which is Sisera, right? Sisera was, again, the captain of this nation, and he had 900 chariots of iron, right? So he had these crazy resources, this manpower to be able to defeat their enemies. And at the time, their enemy was the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. So Deborah and Barak, they go into battle with 10,000 soldiers, battling Sisera with his 900 chariots of iron, right? They're fighting it out. The Lord is behind the people of Israel. So they're defeating the Canaanites, their enemies, right? So Barak sees that they're losing. So he's like, oh man, what do I do? So he bails. He gets off of his chariot and he's like, deuce, bye Felicia. So he makes a run for it, right? He goes into this tent of this woman called Yael. Now, Yael's father was neutral. He was kind of like Switzerland in World War, right? He wasn't the enemy of Israel, but he also wasn't the enemy of Canaan, right? So Sisera thought he would be safe there. So he goes and he speaks to this woman, Yael, and Yael says, hey, come into my tent. Don't worry, be at ease. We're going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of you. So he drops his guard, right? So he's like, all right, cool. So he goes into her tent. He lays down. He's so tired from the fight. He asks her for some milk, for something to drink. She offers him milk, and he goes to sleep, right? While he's sleeping, Yael takes a tent spike and a hammer, and she drives it through his temple. So she kills him. She kills Sisera, right? So then she goes, she looks for Barak and tells him like, hey, if you're looking for Sisera, he's in my tent, come on. She goes, and then Barak sees that Sisera is dead. So Sisera and the nation of Canaan have been defeated, right? Because God was with them. So that verse that we read in the Bible where it said that Barak was going to go into battle, but he wasn't going to have the honor of defeating Sisera. That's what they're talking about. That's what it means, that God told Deborah that the champion or the one to defeat Sisera would be a woman. And in this case, it was a woman. It was Yael, right? So that's what that means. So I think it was really interesting that Deborah had so many roles. She wore so many different hats, right? So she was not only a judge for Israel, she was a priestess and a prophetess, and she was also a warrior. I mean, who would have thought that she would go into battle, right, with Barak? But she did. So we're just going to recap real quick. So we learned about Deborah. She was told by God to seek out Barak. Barak should gather 10,000 warriors and go to war against their enemy, Sisera, who was the captain of the people of, or the nation of Canaan. But Sisera actually dies at the hands of Yael, a woman, right? So I think it's a really interesting story for Deborah, because, I mean, you're thinking like, okay, she was a judge, so, she would sit there and help people, give them counsel or whatever. Well, she was also a warrior because, she went into battle with Barak, right? Yeah, so that's the story of Deborah. It's a really interesting story. I think she's an amazing character. Not character, but an amazing character in the Bible that I think you guys should read about. I mean, it's pretty neat, all the things that she did, that she accomplished. I'm going to leave you guys with one last thing. So I don't know if you can see this quote, but I'm going to read it. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. So the perfect example of this would be David and Goliath, right? Sorry, I'm going into something else. But nobody thought that this small child, right, the small kid, because David was just a kid, was going to be able to defeat this giant Goliath. But he did, because God qualified him, basically gave him the tools, necessary in order to defeat this giant, this great enemy, right? So I think it's the same thing with Deborah, because, I mean, it's not like Deborah had been raised to be a warrior, not like the Spartans, like that's all they did. But, she was like, okay, I'm going into battle, and she put her faith in God, right? So what can we take away from this? Just a few things. I think it's to be obedient. So whenever God calls you, just be open and be obedient, right? Be brave, be courageous, because he's got your back. He's gonna help you in, tough times. He's there. He's gonna help you. And, stand strong. Even though things are gonna be difficult sometimes, just stand your ground and stay strong and be faithful toward God, because he's gonna help you. All right, guys, that's all the time that we have today. Hope you guys enjoyed the lesson today. If you guys can, give us some comments, give us some feedback to see what you liked, what you didn't like, and we'll see you next Sunday. Bye.